the Parisian Olympics were a feast for the eyes. We think about all those beautiful backdrops when we saw the sporting events, and it was also a feast of medals for the United States. Coming in #1, USA, 126 total medals, tied for first in gold medals. And depending on your perspective on things, that's the one that really matters. Who really knows? What we can say is the U.S. did very well, as did Paris, and it has us thinking a lot about what comes next, because as you know, Los Angeles is gearing up to host the next Summer Olympics. But with the bright lights of the sports world set to shine in our city in 2028, the clock is ticking as organizers work to make the event a success. Joining me now with more is David Wharton, staff writer at the Los Angeles Times. Wharton was also in Paris for this year's games, also an expert fencer, I might add, so I know he watched a lot of that as well. And a tough gig for you being in Paris. First of all, condolences on that.
Yeah, it was really awful. Really, really hard work.
I know it was. And hey, you made it up to us all by writing these great pieces for the LA Times, really talking about what was happening there and also what it all means for LA. And you asked this question, which I'm going to pose back to you now. How can Los Angeles possibly top what we saw there in Paris? What's your sense on that?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, you know, the LA organizers were there kind of watching everything behind the scenes, and they know they can't beat Paris. We don't have an Eiffel Tower, we don't have Versailles. So they're going to have to do something that's very LA, and I think that's their goal. I think they're going to lean heavily into Hollywood production values, and it's more of the pop culture rather than the historical. They can't compete otherwise, so I think they're just going to try to be LA.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Casey Wasserman, one of the organizers, said it's going to be an authentically Los Angeles Olympics. And you gave us a sense of what that might look like. And LA also played a part of what was happening there in Paris, especially in that closing ceremony. Many of us who were watching saw our mayor, Karen Bass, up there just grabbing the flag and having a moment. Just talk about Los Angeles' role overall in the closing ceremony.
Well, you know, it's funny because I've been covering the games for about 20 years now. And every time there's a closing ceremony, the next city up gets a little 15-minute segment. And it's something usually gets overlooked, but it is important to the next city because it's kind of a way to kick things off. It's also a way to attract more corporate sponsors and more money. And so LA kind of went all out with the star power, and people probably saw. I mean, even though we knew it was coming, it was an amazing sight to all of a sudden the spotlight show Tom Cruise standing on the roof of the stadium, just this kind of lone figure, and then coming down on a line and running in and grabbing the flag and roaring off on a motorcycle, and that kind of led to a big video that they had put together that ended with a concert on the sand there in Long Beach with Snoop Dogg and Billie Eilish and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So you tried to use that 15 minutes of fame to get in people's minds.
Yeah, and I've read that, it's an opportunity to get in people's minds in part because you want to really court that advertising. You're going from the River Seine to the sand of Los Angeles, and it's going to be expensive to get it all here. And one of the things, of course, that Los Angeles is trying to learn from is just the logistical and other sorts of things as well. Mayor Bassett there in part for that, as are supervisors Horvath and Hilda Solis and others. What lessons do you think that they're coming back with?
Well, I mean, I think you can make all sorts of plans and you can talk to people about what it's like, but until you are there, really seeing it all working, it's impossible to really understand what an immense undertaking it is. Dozens of venues, all sorts of transportation, trying to coordinate between all sorts of working groups. And, I think I heard some of the LA people who were there. I mean, LA 28 has had people there for a month, and they'll be there all the way through the Paralympics in September. And they were talking about communication, just trying to get all the parts talking to each other so that things can come off, whether it's getting tickets sold or moving people through to venues or moving them around in the stands and getting the athletes to the right place at the right time. I mean, it's just a lot of moving parts. So they were really talking about the communication that needs to be in place.
So much of this is also infrastructure and moving around the city. One of the reasons that Los Angeles' bid won is because there was no new buildings. Also, then there's this conversation around no cars, which will require a huge boost in infrastructure. Mayor Bass has talked about this as the Olympics as an opportunity to accelerate, as an accelerator for some of these sort of priorities that she has in Los Angeles. What's your sense of the no-car Olympic Games, though? Do you think it's going to work out? Will the infrastructure be there in time? Will the parking be a disaster? Will people be able to get around?
Well, I think that public transport advocates really like that she stepped up and said that. I'm not so sure the organizers were totally thrilled because the idea of a no-car Olympics, obviously, I don't think anyone really expects it to be in the extreme like that. There are going to be some venues. We expect that the Dodger Stadium and the Rose Bowl will be signed on as venues pretty soon. They have a lot of parking. People will be able to drive to those, but there will be some venues like the Coliseum. All of those parking lots will be taken up with sort of back of the house types of things and a training track for the athletes. There will be some other venues where there'll just be little to no parking. So now you're talking about people having to find a way to get there without driving their cars, and that could mean taking public transport. It could also mean driving to a satellite lot, maybe a mile or 2 or 5 miles away, and then taking shuttle buses in.
I'm looking at your reporting here, talking about some of the price figures, price tags to this thing. $7 billion estimated cost, and right now about $1 billion short of a $2.5 billion goal for this point. In LA in '84, it was a profit. I mean, this is one of the things that people are thinking about, what it might mean for our local economy and overall. What are you seeing when it comes to the finances?
Well, the Olympics are expensive, and it's always a risk. But I would say, in my estimation, LA is one of the 5 cities in the world that can sort of handle this job. So, you mentioned the 2.5 billion. That's what they want to raise in corporate sponsorships, and they're still $1 billion short, but they've got obviously 4 years to make that up. There's going to be ticket sales, there's going to be merchandising, there's going to be billions of dollars that they will get from the International Olympic Committee. So that isn't their only revenue source, but they do need to pick that up. That's where that closing ceremony bit comes in, trying to get people excited about LA. And there's also, people have to remember that the federal government's going to spend maybe $2 billion to help out with security, and there's going to be other costs involved with that will be public money. But that main $7 billion, they want to try to raise all through private.
You have this great quote about how Mayor Bass sitting with that flag in the plane, and she's saying, well, it feels like the clock is ticking now. It's begun. And it was like a sort of a trigger for her experience of it. In our final moment, just talk about what comes next and what LA might have over Paris.
Well, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, they have the venues in place. And a lot of times organizing committees are just racing to try to get things built. LA doesn't have to worry about that. We've got the SoFi Stadium, the Intuit Dome, Crypto.com Arena. So what they'll do now is they'll spend a month or 2 poring over all the notes they took in Paris, trying to figure out what they learned. And then they have to, really get busy, raising the rest of that money, trying to figure out other ways they can try to make these games special and make them very LA. There's a lot of work to do, but this is the point where it becomes operational, where the plans and the big thoughts have to sort of go to the side and you have to get things done.
Yeah, and there's so much on the line in so many ways, especially after what we just saw with Paris. Way to raise the bar, Paris. I'm so glad you had a good time doing it and seeing it and reporting on it. Your pieces are great, as always, David Wharton. We're really happy to have you here on Inside the Issues, man.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. For more stories in your communities, click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV for the latest information, balanced coverage, weather updates every 10 minutes, and more. We'll see you then.